Hello everyone, now we begin a story that might just leave your heart pounding for all the right reasons. You're in a roadside diner just after sunrise, the kind with vinyl booths, sticky menus, and that soft hum of old country playing low over the speakers. The smell of burnt coffee hangs in the air, mingling with bacon grease and that tangy note of syrup left open too long. It's the kind of morning where truckers nod at each other and waitresses call you hon before you've even spoken, but today, there's tension brewing beneath that comforting normalcy. The sort of day where something ugly is going to surface, and you won't know whether to look away or get involved. And you probably won't survive this one emotionally if you've ever worn a uniform. Known someone who has, or believed in simple human decency, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I read every comment. Now, relax, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get into today's story. The diner isn't busy yet. You hear the faint squeak of the door opening, no bell here, just that dry creak of hinges needing oil. The man who walks in is in his early 60s, maybe. Gray hair peeking out from under a faded army cap, the kind that isn't for show but earned. He walks with a cane, and not for dramatic effect, his left leg drags just slightly. A rhythm learned from injury and years of coping. He wears a flannel shirt, jeans stiff from use, and boots that have more scuff than shine. He's not flashy. He's not trying to be seen, but some people always see the weak as targets. He takes a seat in the corner booth. Not hidden, not in the middle. Just where he can see the whole room, old habits, maybe. The waitress brings his coffee without him needing to ask, and he nods, no smile, just gratitude. Outside, the sky's warming to pale orange. Inside, you hear cutlery clinking, a slow news story murmuring on a TV no one's watching, and the low chuckle of three men in the booth behind him. They came in a few minutes after him, early 30s, maybe late 20s. One has sleeve tattoos and a trucker cap. Another's got a laugh that sounds like it needs to be heard. The third's quieter but smirking, feeding off the others. They order big breakfasts, loud and arrogant about it. They've got that buzz about them, not drunk, but maybe last night hasn't quite worn off yet, and that's when the jokes start. At first, it's just muttering. One of them says, "Hey, Gramps forgot what decade it is." The others laugh. The veteran doesn't turn around. Doesn't even twitch. Just sips his coffee. You can feel the air start to shift, like when a thunderstorm is still miles away but the animals already know. Tattoo guy turns up the volume. "Hey, soldier boy, you miss your tank or just limping from the nursing home?" Another round of chuckles. The waitress hears it. Her lips press tight, but she keeps walking. She's seen things like this go south. The veteran. Still silent. He reaches for the sugar. His hand shakes, not from fear. You know that kind of shake. That's nerve damage or pain meds that take time to settle in. But they take that shake as weakness. Laugh guy decides to poke more. Bet that cane's just for show. Trying to get sympathy. Fake limp for free pancakes. That's when the diner shifts. Not visually. But in energy. Everyone notices now. Forks hover over eggs. Cups are half lifted. People are listening, even if they won't look. Because this is the kind of scene that tests you. Are you a watcher, a bystander, or something else? The veteran finally looks over his shoulder. One glance. Not a stare. Just a tired, worn-out flick of the eye. And that's all. No words. No comeback, but in the corner, by the window where the sun's just catching the blinds, another man closes his newspaper. He's older than the bullies, younger than the veteran. Maybe mid-50s. Athletic, clean posture. You'd miss him if you weren't paying attention. Khaki pants. Crisp, tucked-in polo. A Marine Corps ring catches the light as he folds the paper. He hasn't touched his food. He's just been watching, and he stands. The bullies don't see him yet. Too busy laughing at their own echo. The veteran turns his eyes back to his coffee. But the colonel, and you just know he's a colonel, even if you can't see a badge, walks toward the booth, not fast. Not dramatic. But deliberate. A stride built from parades and deployments and years of knowing exactly how far each foot needs to fall. You feel your own breath hitch. The air in the diner's gone thick. And nobody knows what's about to happen. Least of all the guys at the booth. The colonel stops right next to their table. Doesn't speak. Doesn't blink. Just stands there, and that's where we'll pick back up. The moment stretches long enough for the sound of the ceiling fan to take center stage. The bullies haven't noticed him yet, not fully. One of them finally catches the figure out of the corner of his eye and glances up, probably expecting a manager, maybe a nosy customer coming to play hero. But when he sees the colonel's face, something falters in him. His smirk flickers. The colonel doesn't say a word, he doesn't need to, his eyes are hard and still, carved from something older than pride, something that doesn't waver under mockery or shrink under cowardice. He doesn't need raised shoulders or balled fists. His presence does all the talking, and now the men at the booth notice. All three of them, you can see it in their shifting body language, like they suddenly realize they're being watched not by a peer, but by someone who has measured lives, buried friends, and still walks like his boots hit sand just yesterday. Their confidence wavers, but one of them, the one with the tattoos, tries to hold on to the mask. Something we can help you with. Old man. But it doesn't come out sharp. It's too high-pitched. It betrays the crack in his act. The colonel lowers his gaze for just a second, then lifts it again, his stare locking on the speaker. He shifts just enough so he's between them and the veteran behind him. It's subtle. Almost like squaring a formation. It's not about intimidation anymore. It's protection. The diner holds its breath, the waitress freezes by the coffee station. A kid at the counter, no older than 16, sets down his milkshake without drinking. A trucker near the window has his wallet open but forgets what he was doing. Still, not a word from the colonel. That silence. It's thunder. It says, "You've said enough already." One of the younger men, a quieter one who hadn't spoken much, finally cracks. He mumbles, "We didn't mean anything, man. Just jokes." Still, no response. The colonel looks down at the table, then back at the men. His eyes land on the plate of half-eaten food in front of Tattoo Guy. Slowly, the colonel reaches out and picks up the man's fork. He doesn't brandish it. Doesn't threaten. He simply sets the fork beside the plate, perfectly aligned, and taps it once. The sound is tiny, tap, but it feels like a gavel. Then the colonel steps aside, only slightly. Just enough for the three men to see who's sitting behind him, the veteran they'd mocked minutes earlier. The veteran who, despite everything, has not turned around again. He's focused on his meal. As if nothing happened. As if the pain isn't worth acknowledgement. Tattoo Guy stands suddenly, like he's about to say something clever or defensive. But he meets the colonel's eyes again and falters. You can see the hesitation in his spine. The colonel doesn't blink. Just watches. Waiting, and in that pause, the second man, the one with the loud laugh, shuffles out of the booth. No jokes now. No smirking. His face has gone flat with that particular shade of shame you don't wash off in a day. I'm gonna go smoke, he says. But you know he's not coming back. The last guy follows, mumbling something that might have been an apology or just a string of nonsense syllables meant to fill the air. Within seconds, their table is abandoned, plates half full. Napkins wrinkled, syrup congealing in untouched corners. The colonel waits until they're gone. Still, he hasn't spoken. He turns then, not to the rest of the diner, not to the witnesses. Just to the veteran. He takes a slow step forward and stops at the edge of the man's booth. The veteran doesn't look up yet. But after a breath, he says quietly, "You didn't have to do that." The colonel finally speaks. Just 4 words, "You shouldn't have to." Then he reaches into his back pocket, pulls out a worn brown leather wallet, and places a 20 and 2 5s on the table. He nods once at the veteran. Then at the waitress. Then he walks back to his booth, but he doesn't sit. He places his napkin beside his untouched plate and turns to leave. Now the silence in the diner isn't the awkward kind. It's reverent. Weighted. Like everyone just witnessed something ancient and sacred. You hear the door creak open. The colonel disappears into the morning light, a shadow stretching behind him as the sun finally climbs above the horizon. The sound of his polished shoes on the pavement is the last thing you hear before the quiet resumes. The veteran picks up the bills on the table. Folds them once. Tucks them under his cup as if he'll leave them for the waitress. He finishes his coffee, slower now, and one by one, the diner returns to normal, sort of. The waitress walks over with the pot in her hand. She looks at the veteran with that expression people wear when they want to say 1,000 things but know that none of them are right. So she settles for a small smile. More coffee? The veteran nods once. Yeah. Please. She pours, and they both look at the now empty booth where the bullies had sat. Syrup still dripping off the side of one plate. Fork crooked on another, but no one touches the table. It's as if the whole room silently agrees that some places should be left undisturbed. The veteran takes a sip of his coffee and sets the cup down with both hands. For the first time that morning, he smiles, not a big grin, but a small, hard-won thing. The kind of smile that doesn't come often, but when it does, it means something. You want to believe this is the end of it. That the lesson was learned and the moment honored, but something's still building, because the real story doesn't end with silence. The real story continues with what happens after the quiet, and that's where we're heading next. The diner doesn't talk about what happened, not right away. There's no applause. No dramatic speeches. Just the clink of forks returning to plates and a cautious glance toward the door, as if expecting the colonel to come back and finish the job with words he never needed in the first place. But he doesn't return, he doesn't need to, and somehow, that's what makes the whole thing echo louder than any confrontation might have. You watch as the old veteran finishes his eggs. He's not in a rush. The stiffness in his hands suggests arthritis, maybe nerve damage from shrapnel or too many years holding a rifle. Each bite is deliberate. He chews slowly, his eyes focused out the window like he's watching something far off, something only he can see, and then the whispers begin, not cruel ones. Not anymore. These are softer. Disbelieving. Did you see that? Was he a Marine? I think he was somebody. The kid at the counter, who hasn't even touched his milkshake, finally leans toward his mom and says, "That guy. The one who stood up. He didn't even yell." His mom nods, absently brushing crumbs off his shirt. Didn't have to. And that's the part people will remember. Not just what the colonel did, but how he did it, because in a world obsessed with volume, sometimes silence is what cuts deepest. The waitress finally clears the abandoned table. She doesn't clean it like she usually does. She moves slowly, setting each plate in her tray like it's part of a ceremony. When she gets to the fork the colonel realigned. She hesitates. Then she picks it up and wipes it carefully before placing it alone on a napkin. Some people, she mutters to herself, still know how to carry weight. But it's not over, because by the time the veteran finishes and stands to leave, another man, a stranger from a booth near the back, gets up too. He's young, wearing construction boots and a dirty hoodie. You can see hesitation in his eyes, like he doesn't know if he has the right to speak. But he does anyway. He steps forward, reaches out, and says, "Thank you for your service, sir." It's not performative. There's a tremor in his voice. Sincerity, raw and awkward. The kind that can't be faked. The veteran pauses. A little surprised, and says, "You're welcome." Simple. Steady. That one moment unlocks the room. A trucker stands. "I was in Fallujah," he says, just loud enough. "You Army or Marine?" The veteran nods. "Army. Iraq, too." A shared look passes between them, an entire war's worth of memories compressed into one nod. The room shifts again, but this time, it's for something good. Someone pays for the veteran's meal without asking. Another diner, an older woman who's barely touched her oatmeal, slips a small note folded neatly into his jacket pocket as he reaches for the door. He doesn't check it until he's outside. It just says, "You matter." "Thank you, but let's zoom out, let's go back, because this story, this moment, it didn't start in that diner." Not really, it started years ago, with two different men walking two different paths. The veteran. He'd served in the early 2000s. Spent time in Tikrit and Mosul. Lost a friend to an IED. Shrapnel in his leg. Medical discharge. He came home to a country that didn't quite know what to do with him. Tried to work a desk job. Couldn't sit still. Ended up taking early retirement and living alone with a dog that barked at thunder. The colonel. Desert Storm. 2 tours in Iraq. 1 in Afghanistan. Bronze Star. He'd seen command decisions ruin lives and still had to write the letters home. He'd seen good men die over bad intel. He'd taught cadets about integrity while knowing most of them wouldn't understand it until it was too late. These two men had never met before that morning, but their paths were shaped by the same values: duty, respect, honor, and when those values were mocked, the colonel didn't hesitate, not because of ego, not because of rage, but because he recognized something in that moment that couldn't be ignored: an injustice unfolding quietly. And he knew silence in that moment wouldn't just be cowardice. It would be complicity. You see, there's a code not written in any manual. It says, when you see someone weaker than you being mocked, you don't get to look away. Especially when you've sworn to protect them. And the colonel? He didn't forget that oath just because the battlefield changed. He saw a battlefield right there: linoleum floors, not desert sand. Syrup and silverware instead of rifles and radios. But a battlefield all the same, and just like the ones he'd crossed before, he met it with presence, not panic. That's why his silence roared, that's why he didn't need to speak, and that's why everyone in that diner now carries the memory of that moment like a scar: quiet, permanent, and a little painful if you press too hard, because witnessing moral clarity isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it leaves you wondering what you would have done. Would you have stood? Would you have looked away? Would you have joined in? And if you were the one being mocked, could you have sat there, calm and proud, even as the world laughed? The answers are never simple. But that morning, in that diner, the answer was embodied in a man with a cane, another with a ring, and the silence that passed between them. That's what will linger long after the syrup's cleaned, the plates washed, and the bullies forgotten. That's what echoes, and it still isn't over. Because there's one last thing the colonel did, something no one in that room saw coming, but we'll get to that next. The veteran steps into the morning sun, unaware that a dozen eyes inside the diner are still watching him through the windows. He moves slowly, partly from age, partly from injury, and partly because after a morning like that, there's no need to rush. He pauses at the crosswalk, adjusts his cap, and strokes the grizzled fur of his service dog waiting patiently beside him. You might think that's the end of it, that justice was served and everyone got to walk away changed. But what happened next? That's where the deeper current begins to pull, because just as the veteran reaches his car, an old Chevy with mismatched paint on the driver's door, another vehicle pulls up behind it. Quiet. Smooth. Government plates. The colonel steps out. He hadn't left after all. He'd just moved his car around the block. Watching. Waiting. Measuring the distance between dignity and disrespect, like he's done his whole life. You see, for a man like him, the mission doesn't end when the crowd disperses. He's not there for the show. He's there for the soul of the thing. He approaches the veteran slowly. "Sir," the colonel says, calm and measured. The veteran turns, surprised but not alarmed. "I figured you were long gone. Wanted to make sure you got out clean. Just have it." A beat passes, the veteran nods. "You served?" "Still do." "Consultant now?" "Was a colonel." There's mutual recognition in that moment. Not just military rank, but a sort of spiritual rank, two men who know what it means to stand alone under pressure and still choose what's right. And that's when the colonel does something unexpected. He reaches into the pocket of his neatly pressed jacket and pulls out a small velvet box, square, dark, worn at the corners. "I've carried this for a long time," he says. "Was given to me by a man who pulled my unconscious body out of a burning Humvee. Never got to return the favor. He told me, if you ever see a man being disrespected who doesn't deserve it, especially if he's served, make sure he knows someone still sees him." He opens the box. Inside is a challenge coin. But not just any coin, it's Marine Corps brass, edge-worn and smooth from time. On one side, the eagle, globe, and anchor. On the other, a Latin inscription, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. "I'm not a Marine," the veteran says quietly. "Doesn't matter. You lived the code." The colonel places the coin in the man's palm. That's all that ever mattered. The veteran stares at it, speechless. People think these coins are just ceremonial tokens, military poker chips, handed out during photo ops. But among veterans, among those who truly understand, they are sacred. You don't give one unless it means something. You don't accept one unless it changes something. And this? This isn't a thank you, it's a welcome home, it's a statement. "I saw what they tried to take from you. I'm giving it back." The veteran closes his hand around it like he's holding a memory he thought he'd lost. Then, in a voice made of gravel and gratitude, he says, "I didn't think anyone did that anymore." The colonel nods. "Most don't. But the ones who still believe. We've got to remind each other. They shake hands, and something shifts between them. Not just mutual respect, there's plenty of that, but something deeper. A brotherhood that transcends branches and uniforms, formed not in basic training but in the moments when standing up means standing alone. The colonel starts to turn. Then pauses. He gestures toward the diner with a slight grin. Next time someone mouths off, I might bring a copy of the uniform code and have him read it aloud before breakfast. The veteran chuckles. You might give someone a heart attack. That'd be justice too. They part with a handshake that's not rushed. A grip that lingers just long enough to say the things words never quite do. Then the colonel walks to his car, pulls out, and disappears down the street without fanfare. No medals. No goodbye. Back in the diner, the energy has shifted permanently. You see it in the kid at the counter who keeps glancing at the table where the confrontation happened, his milkshake now half melted. He asks the waitress if she's ever seen something like that before. She shakes her head, not in years. And that's true. Because what happened here? That kind of quiet courage, it's rare. And rarer still is the kind of follow-through that doesn't seek credit. That's what the colonel did. He didn't just show up. He finished the mission, but here's the part nobody noticed. Before leaving, the colonel had stopped at the register. He paid for the veteran's meal, yes, but he also paid for the next 5 veterans who'd walked through the door. Left a note with the manager. Quiet. Anonymous, it simply said, in honor of someone who didn't ask for respect, but earned it anyway. That note stays pinned by the register for weeks. More veterans start showing up. Word spreads. Quietly, slowly, like stories passed around campfires. One day, a man with a service dog walks in, sees the note, and gets misty-eyed before ordering a coffee. A few days later, a woman in uniform stops by on her lunch break and gets handed a free meal with nothing but a nod. The ripple keeps growing, because justice, real justice, isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. It's not just about making the bullies shut up, it's about making the world right again for the person who was hurt. The colonel knew that, so did the veteran, and now, maybe, so do you. But we're still not done, because there's one more thing you need to understand, something quieter, deeper, and far more important than anything you've heard so far. It's not about the colonel, not even about the veteran. It's about you, and that's coming next. You sit there. Maybe on your couch, maybe in your car, maybe just pacing the kitchen with your headphones in, and the question slowly begins to rise. Unspoken but persistent, what would I have done? Because by now, you've realized this story isn't about strangers in a diner. It's about something far closer. You, and that thought, the one that tugs at your gut, is the one we need to sit with for a moment, because here's the uncomfortable truth. You've been in a version of that diner before, maybe not with a veteran being mocked, but you've seen someone humiliated in public. Someone laughed at for stuttering. Someone mocked for their weight. Someone treated like they didn't belong, because of how they looked, who they loved, or what they'd survived. And in that moment, maybe you froze, or looked away, or stayed quiet because it wasn't your place. And that's the part that stings. Because it was your place, you may not wear a uniform. You may not have been taught battlefield tactics or issued challenge coins. But you have been handed a different kind of power, your presence, your ability to step into a moment and tilt it toward kindness or cowardice. See, when the colonel stood up without saying a word, he reminded us of something ancient and sacred, that leadership is not about speaking first, or loudest, or most often. It's about anchoring the room, it's about being the gravity that pulls things back into moral orbit, and it doesn't require age, rank, or medals. It requires courage in the quiet. Now let's go back to that diner one last time. A week later, new faces. New conversations. Same faded booths. But one table now feels different. The one where the veteran sat. People avoid it for a few days, almost like it's sacred ground. Then a teenager in an ROTC hoodie finally slides in and sits there, quietly, respectfully, like he knows he's sitting in a story he wasn't even part of, and over time, something odd happens. People start noticing more. A man who used to make crude jokes about lazy vets now tips his hat when one walks in. The cashier who'd stayed silent that day. She starts gently standing up to customers who get snippy with her staff. Even the teenager at the counter, the one with the milkshake, comes back a few days later with his school project, a diorama of a battlefield made from clay and cardboard, labeled "Real Heroes Don't Need to Shout." That table, it becomes a kind of memorial, not for a death, but for a resurrection. Of values. Of awareness. Of a room learning to breathe differently after it had been shaken into conscience, and maybe that's what this story is really about, not about justice served, but justice learned, not about bullies being shut down, but about a community realizing it had grown numb, and starting to feel again. Because here's something the Colonel would tell you, if he could sit beside you right now, drink his black coffee slowly, and look you square in the eye, being brave in front of a crowd doesn't mean being loud. It means being steady. Quiet. Unshakable. Especially when it's not about you, and here's the kicker, you don't need to wait for a diner moment. You'll get 100 chances this year, every time someone's dignity is threatened, every time someone small and hoping no one notices, every time cruelty pretends to be comedy, and the room gives it a pass. That's your battlefield, and you are the Colonel. If you choose to be, you won't always get a velvet box or a thank you note. But you will earn something far more permanent, the knowledge that when the moment arrived, you stood up anyway. So if you're still watching this video, still listening, still sitting with the weight of this story, then here's your quiet call to arms: look up, see more, stand steady, and when the room grows cold with cruelty, be the warmth. Be the anchor, be the person someone remembers years later when they say, I didn't think anyone did that anymore. But someone did. Because kindness, real, grounded, no-nonsense kindness, isn't a trend. It's a legacy, and you're part of it now. Let that sink in, let it hold you, and now, just breathe, let's wind down together, slow down now. Let the images of the diner soften around the edges. Picture the morning light spilling through those wide front windows, dust dancing in the beams like quiet prayers. Hear the distant sizzle from the griddle, the clatter of dishes, familiar sounds, small comforts. Let the tension in your shoulders ease a little. You've carried a lot during this story, memories. Maybe guilt, maybe pride. It's okay. Let it all settle. You might still be thinking about the Colonel. About the veteran. About the look in that kid's eyes when silence taught him more than words ever could. That's good. Let those images live in you, not like burdens, but like compass points. We don't need to chase grand gestures to make the world better. We just need to notice. To act when it's time. To honor those who already have, and the next time you find yourself in a moment that feels off, even just slightly, pause. Ground yourself. Remember the weight of a single glance. Remember the table that turned into a memorial. Remember the man who stood without speaking. These stories don't end. They ripple. Through you. Through everyone who watches, who listens, who decides, next time, I won't stay quiet, so exhale. Let the fan hum in the background. Let your breath come easy, you're not alone, and this story, it's yours now.